November 27, 1950. The Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. Temperature, -35 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Lieutenant Chen Wei of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army watched through frozen binoculars as American Marines established their perimeter below. His breath crystallized instantly in the brutal Manchurian wind. Around him, soldiers from the 9th Army Group huddled in quilted cotton uniforms, already shivering violently despite the battle not yet beginning. "They look soft," Chen transmitted to his company commander, observing Marines moving deliberately through the snow in their bulky parkas. "Like fat ducks waddling. Our men are lean, hardened. This will be easy." His commander, a veteran of the Chinese Civil War, laughed through chattering teeth. "The Americans bring their comfort with them. We bring our spirit. Spirit defeats luxury every time." What neither Chen nor his commander understood, what 120,000 Chinese soldiers entering that frozen hell couldn't have imagined, was that they were about to discover the difference between ideological fervor and industrial capability, between revolutionary zeal and systematic preparation, between dying for your beliefs and surviving to fight another day. The temperature would drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit within 48 hours. At that temperature, exposed flesh freezes in minutes. Steel becomes brittle as glass. Rifle bolts seize. Blood thickens. Men die simply from breathing too deeply, their lungs crystallizing from the inside. The Chinese 9th Army Group entered the Chosin Reservoir campaign with 120,000 men wearing summer-weight cotton uniforms, canvas shoes, and thin gloves. Most carried a week's ration of rice and dried corn. Their PPSH-41 submachine guns and Mosin-Nagant rifles, designed for the Russian winter, should have been reliable. But without proper lubricants, which they didn't have, the weapons became frozen clubs within hours of exposure. The United States 1st Marine Division, by contrast, entered that same frozen landscape with equipment that represented a revolution in cold-weather warfare. Every Marine wore a 4-layer cold-weather system, thermal underwear, wool uniform, wind-proof outer layer, and the M1943 parka, a technical marvel that had taken American engineers 3 years to perfect. The difference wasn't immediately obvious. To Chinese observers, the bulky Americans looked slow, overloaded, ridiculous. "They carry their houses on their backs," soldiers joked during the initial deployment. "We travel light and fast. This is how guerrilla armies defeat empires." But beneath those laughable parkas was a system designed by scientists, tested in Alaska, refined through millions of dollars of research, and mass-produced with a precision that had built 300,000 aircraft during World War II. Each component, from the vapor barrier boots to the trigger finger mittens, solved a specific problem that Chinese soldiers didn't even know existed yet. On November 27th, as temperatures plummeted and the first probing attacks began, Chinese soldiers were already dying. Not from bullets. From cold. Men who had survived the long march, who had defeated the nationalists against impossible odds, were freezing to death before firing a shot. The Americans, wrapped in their scientific armor, were about to teach the world a brutal lesson. Wars aren't won by the toughest soldiers. They're won by the best-equipped ones. The first night revealed the catastrophe. Sergeant William Barber's company, dug into positions at Fox Hill, spotted them at dawn. Chinese soldiers, hundreds of them, frozen in attack positions. Not casualties from battle, casualties from temperature. They had advanced through the night, intending to overrun the Marine positions. Instead, they'd frozen mid-stride, turned into ice sculptures by the -38-degree wind. "They're not all dead yet," Corpsman James Claypool reported, checking the nearest Chinese soldier. "Some are still breathing. Barely. But they can't move. Can't speak. Just frozen." The sight was more disturbing than combat casualties. These weren't men killed by weapons. They were men killed by arithmetic. The cold weather equation was simple and merciless. Heat loss minus heat generation equals death. The Chinese uniform system generated insufficient heat. Therefore, death. Private Robert Azell, from Georgia, had complained bitterly about his cold weather gear during training. "Feels like I'm wearing a mattress," he'd griped while practicing in California. "Can barely move in all these layers. The enemy will run circles around us." Now, watching Chinese soldiers literally frozen to the ground, Azell understood. "They did run circles around us," he muttered to his foxhole companion. "Then they stopped running. Then they stopped breathing. The marine cold weather system wasn't just clothing, it was engineering. The outer shell used a revolutionary wind-resistant cotton fabric that blocked the knife-edge Siberian winds. Beneath it, wool layers trapped warm air in millions of tiny pockets. The innermost layer, made from new synthetic materials, wicking moisture away from the skin, preventing the deadly combination of sweat and cold that killed through evaporative cooling. But the true genius was in the boots. The Shoepak Vapor Barrier Boot, developed specifically for Korean operations, featured a rubber lower and leather upper with multiple insulation layers. Most critically, it included a removable felt liner that Marines were ordered to change daily. Wet liners meant frozen feet. Frozen feet meant frostbite. Frostbite meant amputation or death. Chinese soldiers wore canvas shoes, essentially heavy sneakers, with cloth wrappings. Within hours of combat operations, their feet were frozen blocks of tissue. Tens of thousands of Chinese casualties at Chosin weren't from bullets. They were from frostbite so severe that toes and feet simply broke off. Captain William Hopkins, a Marine Company commander, captured a Chinese lieutenant during the second day of fighting. Through an interpreter, the prisoner explained his unit's situation. "We were told the cold would affect the Americans more than us. That soft capitalists couldn't endure hardship like revolutionary soldiers. We were told their equipment would fail, and our superior spirit would triumph." Hopkins gestured to his Marines, moving efficiently through defensive positions despite the brutal cold. "What happened?" The Chinese officer's response was translated carefully. "We discovered that spirit cannot generate heat. That believing you're warm doesn't prevent freezing. That all our revolutionary fervor couldn't stop our rifles from jamming, our grenades from failing to detonate, our men from dying in their sleep." The temperature dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit on November 28. At that threshold, Fahrenheit and Celsius converge, a temperature so cold that measurement systems agree on its lethality. The Chinese battle plan had been brilliant on paper. General Song Sherluen's 9th Army Group would encircle the Marines at Chosin, cutting them off from retreat and reinforcement. Superior numbers, 120,000 Chinese versus 30,000 Americans, would overwhelm the isolated forces. Night attacks, using terrain and darkness, would negate American firepower advantages. The brutal cold would be China's ally, hardening their peasant soldiers while weakening soft Americans accustomed to heated barracks. Every assumption proved catastrophically wrong. The night attacks failed because Chinese soldiers couldn't maintain combat effectiveness in extended cold exposure. Units would move into attack positions and simply freeze before reaching Marine lines. Those who did reach combat range discovered their weapons non-functional. PPSH-41 submachine guns, loaded with oil-based lubricants that turned to sludge at -30 degrees, became useless metal tubes. Even when weapons functioned, soldiers wearing thin cotton gloves couldn't manipulate triggers. Their fingers were already frozen. Marines, by contrast, wore trigger finger mittens, an ingenious design that kept hands warm while allowing the index finger to extend for shooting. Their M1 Garand rifles, maintained with special cold-weather lubricants developed during World War II Arctic operations, functioned reliably even at -40 degrees. Their ammunition, stored inside their parkas to prevent freezing, fired consistently. But the most devastating disparity wasn't weapons, it was survival infrastructure. Marines carried individual portable stoves using jellied fuel that burned efficiently in extreme cold. They could heat rations, melt snow for water, and warm their hands and feet during brief respites. Each company had warming tents where men rotated for 20-minute thawing sessions. Medical teams had heated aid stations where frostbite casualties received immediate treatment. Chinese soldiers had campfires, when they could find wood, when they dared reveal positions, when matches still worked with frozen fingers. Most subsisted on frozen rice they couldn't cook, snow they couldn't melt safely, and desperation they couldn't sustain. Private First Class James Ransone Jr. participated in a patrol that discovered an entire Chinese company, approximately 200 men, frozen in a valley approach. They'd been moving in column formation when temperatures plunged overnight. The lead elements had slowed, then stopped. Those behind had bunched up, seeking collective warmth. By dawn, they were a frozen mass of humanity. "We found their orders," Ransone later reported. Written instructions detailing their attack plan, the American positions, everything. Perfect intelligence. Perfect planning. They just froze to death before executing it. The orders, recovered by Marine intelligence, revealed Chinese commanders knew their troops were inadequately equipped. One directive explicitly stated, soldiers must maintain revolutionary enthusiasm to generate internal warmth. Political officers will ensure ideological strength prevents cold weather weakness. Major General Oliver Smith, commanding the 1st Marine Division, read the translated orders with grim recognition. They tried to defeat thermodynamics with ideology. That's not warfare, that's mass suicide. The battles at Chosin became a grotesque demonstration of capability disparity. Chinese forces attacked with numerical superiority and tactical surprise. Marines defended with systematic preparation and industrial support. Chinese soldiers died from cold before combat. Marines survived combat, then managed the cold. By December 1st, Chinese casualty estimates from cold injury alone exceeded 30,000 men, more than the entire Marine force present. The breakout from Chosin Reservoir became legend, but the real story was survival arithmetic. When General Smith ordered the Marine withdrawal on December 6th, he famously stated, "Retreat, hell! We're not retreating, we're just advancing in a different direction." The fighting withdrawal, covering 78 miles through Chinese-held territory in -35-degree temperatures, should have been catastrophic. Instead, it became a testament to preparation versus improvisation. Chinese forces, positioned along the entire route, had every advantage except one: their soldiers could barely function. Units assigned to block Marine movements couldn't maintain positions overnight. Soldiers froze to death in their defensive positions. Weapons jammed. Ammunition failed. Even successful ambushes collapsed when attackers discovered they physically couldn't continue fighting after 20 minutes of exposure. Marine columns moved with systematic deliberation. Every few miles, they'd establish warming stations. Corpsmen rotated through units checking for frostbite. Engineers kept vehicles running, a challenge requiring constant maintenance, but achievable with proper cold weather equipment. Supply drops provided hot food, ammunition, and critically, replacement cold weather gear. The Chinese 9th Army Group, which entered the campaign with 120,000 soldiers, emerged with approximately 40,000 combat-effective troops. The Marines suffered 836 killed in action, 192 missing, and 3,485 wounded. But the cold weather casualty disparity told the real story. Marines had 7,313 frostbite cases, nearly all treated and returned to duty. Chinese forces had over 30,000 cold weather casualties, most fatal or permanently disabling. Colonel Alpha Bowser, Marine Operations Officer, analyzed the campaign in his after-action report. "We didn't defeat the Chinese 9th Army Group. Winter defeated them. We simply had the equipment to survive what they couldn't." Years later, surviving Chinese commanders acknowledged the disaster. General Song Sherluan admitted in post-war memoirs, "We lost more men to cold than combat. Our soldiers' courage was unquestionable. Their equipment was inadequate. We sent them to fight in -40 degrees wearing cotton. The Americans sent their men in scientific armor. No amount of revolutionary spirit defeats thermodynamics." The M1943 cold weather system used at Chosin cost approximately $47 per Marine, roughly $600 in modern currency. The Chinese quilted uniform cost perhaps $2 equivalent. That $45 difference represented the gap between survival and death, between military effectiveness and mass casualties, between systematic preparation and ideological improvisation. American factories produced 3 million cold weather uniforms during the Korean War. Each represented thousands of hours of research, testing, and refinement. Scientists had studied heat transfer, moisture management, and ergonomic mobility. Engineers had tested materials in Alaska, Canada, and laboratory freezers. The result wasn't just clothing, it was a survival system backed by industrial capability that China couldn't match. The final irony came in Chinese post-battle assessments, captured by American intelligence. One report concluded, "The American Marines are not superior soldiers. They are adequately equipped soldiers." This difference proved decisive. We must develop similar capabilities. But developing those capabilities required industrial infrastructure, research institutions, material science, and systematic testing, advantages requiring decades to build. By then, The lesson of Chosun had been written in frozen corpses across the Korean mountains. Courage without capability equals death. Equipment defeats enthusiasm. And wars are won by logistics, not spirit. The Americans hadn't laughed at Chinese soldiers entering that frozen hell. By the time they emerged, there were barely enough Chinese survivors left to understand why they'd lost.